Oh, good evening and welcome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening for a great conversation with some of Georgia's most amazing and awesome teachers, advocates, and legislators. I am Tonya Winters. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm an avid reader, an advocate, and an activist, but I am also the Georgia State Director for National Parents Union. National Parents Union is the independent, united voice of modern American families. We craft and implement policies, and we build coalitions and collaborate with our over 18,000 affiliates across the nation to amplify the voices of parents. I'm honored this evening to moderate this timely and important conversation about Georgia's new literacy legislation. What's next? How can we build on the laws that are being made in Georgia in this very challenging time that we face in education? The science of reading and how these changes will impact parents, students, and teachers across the state is just one of the subjects that we will broach. Today's conversation brings together a powerful group of voices: literacy advocates shaping best practice, parents impacted by dyslexia and other challenges, educators on the front lines and in classrooms, and the policymakers crafting the change at the state level. Tonight, our goal is to move beyond the headlines, to understand both the promise and the practical realities of new literacy laws and other education bills that have been passed in this session of the Georgia legislature. We'll talk about HB 307 and SB 93, but first, a little update on all of the education bills that came before the House and Senate this session. Literacy and reading instruction. So House Bill number 307, this bill consolidates existing statutory requirements on dyslexia screening into the Georgia Early Literacy Act. Key provisions include mandating universal reading screeners to identify students with potential dyslexia, requiring schools to notify parents if their child exhibits characteristics of dyslexia, and provide strategies for support at home, prohibiting the use of 3Qing method in reading instruction, and establishing a Georgia literacy coaching coordinator to ensure effective coaching and professional learning are happening across the state. I am happy to announce that this bill was signed into law on Monday, and I had the pleasure of being present with one of our very special guests today. Senate Bill 93, known as SB 93, has passed the House and the Senate unanimously by our freshman senator, Rashaun Kemp, who is also in the House tonight. We got some heavy hitters tonight, y'all. But it has yet to be signed by the governor. But we have no doubt that this will become a law across the nation. And what this does is prohibit the use of the 3Qing system and visual memory strategies in teaching word reading. It requires a Georgia Professional Standards Commission to establish criteria for educator preparation programs ensuring alignment with the science of reading, is again passed the House and Senate unanimously and is waiting to be signed by the governor. So listen, Senator Kemp can give you the information if you want to just tap Governor Kemp and say, hey, let's get this signed into law. House Bill 268 was a safety bill. Safety school concerns. It introduced comprehensive measures, including implementing mobile panic alert systems for school employees, establishing emergency alert response systems to communicate safety threats, providing funding for student advocacy, and specialists based on the school system size. And so the hope is that they won't over police the students, but they will offer SROs according to the school size. And also they added a mental health and youth violence prevention program component. That was a very controversial bill. They went back in and amended some of the language. Many people still are not happy with that, but nevertheless, it passed. Senate Bill 123. Since COVID, we've been facing a lot of chronic absenteeism. So this bill addresses chronic absenteeism. Technology use in schools. Many teachers are happy about this, but not a lot of parents and students. But House Bill 340 is to minimize distractions and improve mental well-being, which prohibits the use of personal electronic devices like smartphones and smartwatches by K through 8 students during the school day. SB 1, Senate Bill 1, did pass into being vote out of legislation into a vote and signed into law by Governor Kemp. It bars transgender girls from participating in girls' sports teams, citing concerns over athletic integrity. Another controversial bill. House Bill 127. This bill aimed to withhold state funding from schools with diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI programs. Although it passed the Senate, it did not receive a final vote in the House and was voted down, but it is alive and has the capability to come back next year. House Bill 483 proposed criminal penalties for librarians who provide minors with materials deemed explicit or harmful, and this bill did not advance to a vote in the Senate. Senate Bill 124, which was to expand eligibility for the Georgia Promise Scholarship children for active duty military parents. And this builds on the voucher bill that passed in 2024. And finally, Senate Bill 82, SB 82, aimed to increase the number of locally approved public charter schools in Georgia. That bill was also signed into law by Governor Kemp on Monday. I was also present for the signing of that bill. And so those are our legislative updates. You can find more at your georgiaassembly.gov to look up what these bills started as, what they finished as, and more about the depths of these bills. Next, let me introduce our moderator, and she's going to take the show on from there. Elizabeth Hogan has been an educator for over 25 years. As an elementary and early intervention teacher, Elizabeth taught K through 3 grades and spent 6 years as an early intervention teacher. She discovered her passion for working with struggling readers, and Elizabeth received her structured literacy training with REAP. Reading is essential for all people while being a public school teacher. She loved it so much, and it was such a life-changing experience that she began working as a literacy leader, training teachers for REAP, and does so to this day. Elizabeth also runs a private tutoring practice as a reading mentor and is a founding member and the current president of the Reading League Georgia chapter. Ladies and gentlemen, our moderator for this evening, Miss Elizabeth Hogan.
Tonya, thank you so much. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And we're just so excited. The Reading League Georgia chapter is really excited to be involved tonight. We're super grateful to the National Parents Union for having us and for reaching out and engaging us as the Reading League Georgia is doing this work in Georgia. We are trying to enhance and educate all Georgians about the science of reading and how to follow evidence-based reading instruction practices. That's our hope for all of our Georgia schools and all of our Georgia students, is that they learn to read using evidence-based practices. And so in my day job of training Georgia public school teachers with reading is essential for all people, and in my role as president of the Reading League, we are doing this work. And the cool thing is that we've been doing this work. And so we started our Reading League chapter in 2021. And the Reading League is an amazing resource. And so please visit the Reading League national page and follow us on social media and the Reading League Georgia page, because we offer a lot of really cool webinars, a lot of information, especially for Georgia teachers, on practices that are evidence-based for how to teach our kids to read in Georgia. I'm so excited tonight to be joined by the amazing panelists that we have, because these folks are in the trenches every day alongside me. I'm friends with many of them, have just met some of them through this work, but we are all here because of the same mission. And so every child deserves to read in our country, and then our focus in Georgia. And it's so refreshing and exciting to have a freshman senator back this work that so many of us have been doing for years, and to really push this amazing new legislation that Tonya just talked about forward for Georgia students. So tonight, I'm really excited to introduce the panelists that are going to join us, and I have lots of questions for them. So let's get started. The first panelist that I'm going to introduce tonight is Missy Purcell. Missy is a community organizer for Georgia Can. She has over 15 years of experience as a public school teacher here in Georgia. She co-founded the Gwinnett Advocates for Dyslexia. She is the education chair for Decoding Dyslexia, and she's an amazing dyslexia and special education advocate and a friend. We work together a lot on a lot of different things. But I'm so excited to have Missy here tonight joining us. She's going to bring a lot of expertise. She's always at the Capitol. I know she worked with Senator Kemp really closely on this legislation. And so that's exciting. Missy already has friends here on this panel. I'd also like to bring in a classroom perspective. Dr. Emani Collins is a proud native of Ellenwood, Georgia. She is a 12th grade English teacher at the Carver STEAM Academy. She's also there. Well, they might have just gotten a new one, but she was the teacher of the year last year. She was honored to be the teacher of the year, and that's a big honor. So congratulations, Dr. Collins. She received her degrees in English from the University of West Georgia, and just last year got her PhD from Hampton University. So congratulations on that as well. You are so young, but have accomplished so much, and we're so happy to have you here and joining us tonight. And another really cool thing about Dr. Collins is not only is she a high school teacher, but she teaches part-time as an assistant professor at Morehouse and at Kennesaw State University. So this is really interesting too, because a lot of our legislation is going to focus on how are we preparing our teachers in preparation. So she's going to have kind of a double perspective there. So thanks for joining us, Dr. Collins. And then
Thank you.
You're welcome. Lastly, we're really excited to welcome the freshman senator serving District 38, Senator Rashaun Kemp. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Rashaun is the Senior Director of the National Charter at the National Charter Collaborative. That's where he is focused on amplifying the voices of Black and Brown public charter school leaders. He previously led a national nonprofit organization, serving as its first executive director. I didn't realize this until I read this, that you were also a former high school teacher and principal, and you are the author of Senate Bill 93 and led this effort this year to ban 3Qing in Georgia, something that a lot of us have been working on for a long time. So we are so appreciative. And just looking at this panel, I'm really excited. And thank you all for joining us. I am going to start with you, Senator, if you don't mind, because I would love to hear a little bit about what inspired you to sponsor this legislation. Obviously, you have a background in education. And so, as a high school teacher and principal, just like Dr. Collins does, what happens to our kids, our Georgia students, when they are in high school and they are not able to read. We know what that looks like for a lot of our students. And so I'm assuming some of that inspired this, but I would love to hear the story of Senate Bill 93.
Yeah, first, thank you so much for emceeing this panel of some amazing folks. Obviously, I've worked very closely with Missy. She's been a champion down at the Capitol. And Dr. Collins, I'm just like shocked when you came onto the screen and she gave all of your accomplishments. I was definitely expecting somebody older than me. So congratulations on all that you have been able to accomplish at so young. Senate Bill 93 comes from both my experience as an educator and also predates all the way back to college. I was working with my church at the time. We were teaching kids in the inner city of Dayton, Ohio, how to read. And at the time, I had no idea about 3Qing and about all this stuff, and did not know that Ohio was the epicenter of many of these practices that were put into place that we now know are harmful to our children. And so full circle all the way back to, going to my high school career as a high school educator, so many of our kids did not know how to read. And, as when I was elected and heard that we had not passed a ban on 3Qing, even though we've done some great work in Georgia with the Early Literacy Act, that is a huge step forward. But given the fact that 70% of our kids are not reading on grade level, 7 out of 10 are not reading on grade level, that is a 5-alarm fire in my view. And I set out early on to make sure that I fought to ensure that no child was taught using that flawed method. So came in and got right to work and worked alongside Representative Bethany Ballard, and that language was included in her bill because we both had bills that included that language. And I am very happy to announce that folks can actually call Governor Kemp to thank him, because I got word today that he signed my bill into law. So that bill has been passed, and that bill ensures that we are properly preparing our teachers. That has been kind of like this donut hole in our educational system, that we're not properly preparing our teachers, ensuring that they know how to teach children using evidence-based practices that are aligned exclusively to the science of reading. So very excited to take this on. And I really think that Georgia's going to make great progress because of the efforts of all of us, making sure that kids know how to read.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hear that the governor signed today. We've been waiting. We were hoping it would be before this, so I'm glad you were able to share that news. That's awesome. So I'd love to just pop over Missy and ask you, because I know you and I were in a very similar boat, exactly what Senator Kemp just talked about. We both were elementary school teachers who were taught at some Georgia colleges and universities. And we were not taught how to actually teach students how to read. We were not taught how the brain learned to read. We did not know. We were doing what we were taught in our teacher preparation programs, and we cared so much, and we love our kids that we taught. But I noticed early on in my first couple of years teaching, every year I had a group of kids that I knew were not learning to read. And I really didn't know what to do to help them. And so Missy and I have bonded over a very similar experience. And so I know that Missy, I want her to tell her story a little bit about how she kind of got to know about the science of reading and became an advocate in our state, working so closely with our representatives on this issue. So Missy, can you just share for a minute? And then I kind of want to pivot after that to just how you two got connected and worked together on this.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much, Elizabeth. And it's just an honor to be here. And before we continue, I have to point out that, Rashaun, your lapel pin, if that's what you call it, that's just a perfect touch. So it's a good celebratory touch today. Congratulations. The bill is signed. And I think it's actually one of the most important pieces of the legislation. So it's just a great day. We'll have to celebrate. But how I got started, I have 3 children, actually. I can't leave them out. They often say that the third one's the most important one. He's the baby. He also happens to have dyslexia. And so, I was a teacher, a balanced literacy teacher. I did go to UGA. I was taught My role models were Lucy Calkins and Fontes and Pinnell. And I was very acquainted with the practice of 3Qing and balanced literacy, which is now a debunked method. That intersects with my story because I had a child that was not learning to read in the public school sector like his brothers. They all have similar birthdays. They're all boys. They're all raised in the same house. I know all 3 children aren't the same. However, you know, he should have been catching on at some point. He wasn't. But what I was getting from the school was he has a summer birthday. He's a boy. He'll catch up. You know, just read more to him. You got to get him to love learning to read. And none of those things made sense because he showed areas of great growth in other areas, you know, in math and other subjects. The skill set was there and it just didn't make sense. So I kept pushing. Eventually, he was evaluated and found to be eligible for an IEP. He qualified under the area of specific learning disability. He was later actually officially medically diagnosed with dyslexia and dysgraphia. The problem is as I began to learn about my child's disability, I also began to learn that what I was really educated in the university system of Georgia was not evidence-based, that what I was doing as a teacher for students was harmful to kids. That was a bit of a gut punch to me when I realized that. And to speed the story along, I knew that my child was getting exactly what I had done. He was getting the exact same teaching methods. And so I began to educate myself. I joined every group I could join. I listened to every webinar. I joke, I don't have a doctorate like the wonderful Dr. Emani, but I've attended so many classes and gotten so many trainings just to help my child. And in the process, help me advocate better for him and others that I was able to understand the science of reading and really see it as this body of research that tells us how the brain learns to read. And it was mind-boggling to me that even as I sat in meetings, and this is not to insult our educational system, because as a teacher, I love teachers, but it was mind-boggling to me to sit in these meetings and present evidence on what my child needed, but also I would say every kid needs this, and be told, well, we don't do that here, or he really just needs to work on comprehension and not understand that you can't comprehend without those basic foundational skills. And so that was how I dove into this world. And once I got my child out of that burning building and got him what he needed, I went back because it wasn't just my kid. There's so many kids that are still in the buildings, and every teacher in school was at a different learning point. And so that's when we got louder within our own district, at the state, and just wanted it to change, the system to change so that every kid could have access and every kid's parent didn't have to go almost get a doctorate in order for their kid to learn to read. I'm a big fan of parents partnering with schools, but I know more than a parent should have to know in order for my kid to learn to read. And that's just not viable for our working society. Parents have to work, they have to do other things, and they also want to be parents and not be the person that is having to hold the school accountable daily for the right reading instruction for such a basic skill that every kid needs.
Right. And I feel like it's really a point of privilege, right? I mean, we were educators. I also have a dyslexic son. But we were educators. We knew a lot. And I've worked with so many parents who, you know, they are busy, they are working, they're providing for their family. They don't have the resources to know all that stuff that they have to know. You know, we had to learn it as educators. And also, you know, a lot of people don't have the means to seek out private tutoring, to go to a specialized dyslexia school. So it's a point of privilege. And that's why having this legislation for all Georgia students is so important. And I love that you said every child needs this, because we are often, you know, talking about our dyslexic students, but we know, and when Senator Kemp, you know, brought up how many, you know, our abysmal school reading scores in Georgia, we know all those kids aren't dyslexic. That's poor reading instruction. And that's on, you know, our education department as a whole. So we having this legislation is so important because they don't get, you know, some people don't say, well, we love that old way, or we love to do this. And that just feels so good in my heart. And I love just to surround kids with books, you know, and we've heard all that, right? We know now that actually has to happen. And so this legislation is so key for that. I would love to know, Senator Kemp, how you got connected to Missy and then how y'all kind of worked together, because I know that you did, to get this ball rolling, and with Representative Ballard as well.
Yeah, this is one opportunity for me to advocate. If there's ever a time for someone to have an honorary doctorate, some university needs to reach out to Missy Purcell and give her honorary doctorate, because the level of knowledge and information that she has regarding the science of reading, 3Qing, and literacy is unmatched. And so I just want to thank you, because I leaned on her a lot. And there were times I reach out to her and she'd send me like all the stuff like, whoa, I can't read all of it, but thank you so much. So I really want to thank you. And I really applaud you for just being a concerned mom and educator. We need more of that. And we should not be expecting our parents to have to be able to be those ones that are attaining all this information. But I, like many folks, heard the name Missy Purcell when I started listening to the podcast Soda Story. And it's so wild that during my time listening to this podcast, I actually wrote down her name, and I think I wrote her name wrong or something, but I remember I wrote her son's name. I wrote Matthew. I said mom of Matthew in Gwinnett County. And sorry for giving your location, Missy,
Okay.
but well, it says it in the podcast.
I think everyone knows at this point.
But I wrote that down, and there happened to be Georgia Camp was hosting a Zoom, a webinar, and lo and behold, it was the mom. And I put two and two together, like, oh my gosh, this is the mom that I wrote down. I want to meet her, because I knew I was taking on this issue when I got to the Capitol in January. And so I reached out to her, and she's been an amazing resource ever since. And I just want to reiterate that these changes in our goal of improving literacy is not an attack on educators. It's actually our support of educators, because I have heard so many stories of teachers actually feeling bad and sorry that they have been educating kids the wrong way. But don't get me wrong, politics is politics. I did have some pretty terse conversations with some interest groups that were asking me to withdraw my bill, because people love teaching the old way. People are going to shut their door and do what they want to do. But my take on this is that at least we will be able to catch as many educators as we can to know that by law, you have to teach kids using the science of reading and evidence-based practices. Nobody's always going to love what you do, but ultimately we have to do what's right for kids. And sometimes it means doing it through legislation.
Agreed. All right. I don't want to leave Dr. Collins hanging out much longer. I love that she's still at school. That's such a teacher, right? I can tell she before she was moving around in her classroom, she had all kind of stuff on her whiteboard. So she is still at school, which, we all know about that. But Dr. Collins, I would just love to know your perspective hearing all of this. And I know as a high school teacher, you might feel somewhat removed from this early K-3 work that we're doing, but you are boots on the ground and seeing the implications of these kids when they get to high school. Or even we had talked about, Dr. Collins, when they're graduating high school and then not able really to, it's a sink or swim, even going into college. So are we really equipping our students? And what are you kind of seeing at the high school level?
Yes, thank you so much. First of all, I am so honored to be on this panel with you all. This is simply amazing. I love that people are getting together as a community and talking about this important factor and this important topic. I do have to apologize. I have some pretty big windows in my classroom and the sun is coming in a little too brightly right now. But anyway, it's very challenging right now, especially with me being a 12th grade teacher. I see that there are certain things, just as Senator Kemp and Missy have stated, there are certain things that I feel I'm not doing right as a teacher. I feel like I wasn't equipped. I heard you all talking earlier about making sure that teachers are equipped with the knowledge that they need in order to successfully teach our students. I felt when I first started, I didn't come in with an education degree. I simply had an English degree. I went through the Georgia TAP program, and that's how I ended up getting certified. But honestly, we do have teachers who are teaching on provisional certifications, who they've never taken like a dyslexia class at all. They've never taken a child and adolescent development course. So they really don't know what that looks like. So it's definitely a challenge right now. We need more teachers. So of course, people with provisional certifications are going to be accepted into the school building because we really do need people who want to teach. Some of the things that I see on a daily basis, even when it comes to breaking down maybe a word, right? So having a prefix, the root word, the suffix, something like that. Even in 12th grade, I've taught 11th grade at Carver as well. That is something that I've had to teach as a lesson. It's hard to get students to read these high-level texts if they truly don't understand vocabulary, or if they don't understand synonyms for certain words. I actually have had students in 11th and 12th grade who have asked me exactly, what do you mean when you say a synonym? Honestly, like, what exactly do you mean by that? How do I break that down for you? How do I give you a synonym when I don't even understand this main word, right? So there are tons of challenges. I mean, even with the changes we have in our society, a lot of students don't really feel that it's necessary to read long text anymore. They really don't. How our society is going. I have The Alchemist right here by me. This is one of my favorite books, and I have our students reading it and, kind of adding to their own personal lives as well, and comparing it to their personal lives and their personal journeys as 12th grade students right now. But it is a challenge. It's hard.
Yeah. And I feel like that's something that, and this is, I'm jumping a little bit ahead of myself, but I get excited about this stuff. I want to get more into what we can look for coming up about what this legislation is going to do. But Dr. Collins really had me thinking about, we've failed a lot of our kids that are now in high school, that are now in middle school. And I know in my district specifically, and in the districts that I am training teachers in, they are, they're like saying, but what about our fifth graders? What about our middle schoolers that still aren't reading above a second grade level? And we know we have that in high school too. And we know, unfortunately, the trajectory of that kid. And so it is kind of thinking, what can we do next? And we'll get there when we get to next steps. I'll circle back. But I do want us thinking about it, because I know that, this is going to be amazing change for our K through 3 teachers and schools and students. But we do have a big population that we can't leave behind, because, to quote the great Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better. And so we are hoping, that with training our teachers properly, that is going to filter up, and we won't have those middle and high school students that are functionally illiterate anymore. But unfortunately, we do now. So what are our next steps for that? But put a pin in that. Okay, so I kind of want, because I know that we probably have a lot of parents on this call. So I was kind of thinking about what could we expect? Or actually, let's talk a little bit about 3Qing, because I know those of us in the literacy world, we talk about it a lot, and people are like, I don't know what you mean. So let's talk about, so for our parents that aren't in education, Senator Kemp, what was the big push for that banning 3Qing? Obviously, from your experience in Ohio and them having similar legislation. But what is, you and Missy can kind of piggyback on exactly what is 3Qing? What does that look like? So what should parents be listening for or avoiding? Because I know a lot of parents cue their kids as well while reading. So can we explain that term a little bit more?
Yeah, my motivation in including it was the fact that, you can see short-term gains. A lot of people, even parents, and Missy alluded to this earlier, and I think you did as well, Elizabeth, that you see, they're excited about reading. They love these books, but it's more than that. We have to look at how our brain is wired to really learn how to read. And a lot of times, educators will see short-term gains because they've cued the kid to figure out the word versus the kid allowing themselves to be able to decode words and understand them. So pretty much 3Qing, and I'll let Missy get into the more details of it, is teaching kids to read by guessing. So looking at a picture and figuring out the word, or using other clues like the word next to it, or, things like that, to figure out the word, versus actually decoding and sounding those letter sounds, to be able to apply it later on in their educational career. Because at some point, all those pictures aren't going to be there. And that's where, students begin to fail. So I'll let Missy answer that. My dog's getting excited because my daughter. So
I love it. Well, first of all, you did a great job. And I need to say one part of this conversation and this story that I think is really, really impactful is that our legislators took the time to learn. They listened, they learned, not just to parents, but to teachers, and even learning, like listen to a podcast, doing research. What is 3Qing? The fact that you can tell that you did a really good job. It is guessing. It is 100% guessing. My personal experience with it is getting the kid to look at everything except for the word. It's using the pictures on the page, maybe using the other parts of the word. Like there's a part inside of word that which works some of the time. And maybe sometimes it's just using context clues just to guess the pronunciation of the word. We do use context clues to understand meaning as text gets more complex. So we want to make sure that we don't ever mix this conversation around. You can't use context clues. You can when you know how to read, because then you're looking for meaning. But we don't use those clues to read the word. We need to decode the word. And you can certainly enjoy the photos on the page and the illustrations. We love picture books. My home is filled with them. I'm a former language arts teacher, so I love literature. So it's not about taking the fun and the engagement of reading away. I always say this when people say it makes reading boring to take away 3Qing. I always say, well, what's really boring or what's really not fun is not being able to read. And sitting in a classroom while your teacher is using guided reading with a small group and you're supposed to be independently reading or working on independent text and you can't do it. And so 3Qing is not only a harmful method that has been debunked by the great research from Henry May that has been peer reviewed and backed up numerous times, but it's also harmful for kids long term, and it leads to other problems for our students. The student that's sitting in the room that can't read independently while the group's doing the guided reading, what happens often? They start talking or bothering other students or doing everything they can to not read because they can't. And then what happens? The focus now is on behavior instead of reading. And so this just begins a cycle for students, which then leads to greater problems in our educational system. And even future, we talk about the school to prison pipeline, which could be a whole other podcast. But it starts with not teaching kids to read the way our brains are supposed to learn to read. And in a nutshell, we could just say it's teaching them to guess, like Rashaun said. So yes. And my son was exposed to that. And it was through a program called Reading Recovery, which was founded. The American branch of that is in Ohio. And we do have a training center here in Georgia at Georgia State as well. But that was 20 weeks of teaching him one-on-one to guess, and yielded no better results for him. So we really definitely needed to help parents understand this and teachers understand this and provide better parameters on we're not going to use a tool that doesn't work anymore.
Right. I'm thinking like for parents, I want them I know if maybe you don't know your child is reading aloud to you, you're reading with them at night, whether it be a book they brought home from school or something. And if you see them stopping at a word and kind of, usually it looks like stopping at a word and then they do this kind of weird thing where it's like, they're not actually attacking the word. Like Senator Kemp said, they haven't had instruction in actual decoding the word. And so they're kind of looking, is there a picture I can find? Can I read ahead a couple of words that I might know to help me come back and figure out this word? So it's kind of looking for all these other ways to figure out a word. instead of just actually knowing, what do those consonants say? What is the vowel doing in that word? How can I decode that word based on the phonics instruction that I've received? And often it's really telling. So, for parents that are reading with their children, look for those. Is your child getting to a word that they don't know? And then are they kind of, instead of attacking that word, sounding it out appropriately, are they just looking around for the word to just come out of nowhere? That's what it looks like. And I know we've seen that as teachers, we've seen that as parents. And so that's kind of what we are getting, we're removing from curriculum, from teachers, as far as, and teachers, like you said, Senator Kemp, teachers want to do best by their kids. So even though it is, some of this may seem a little bit divisive, it's certainly not against teachers, because we all want to do better for our kids and we want to be prepared. Now, are we a little frustrated that we paid for those degrees and didn't learn this? Yes. We can be frustrated about that, but we're making changes there as well. So that's good. I just wanted to talk about 3Qing, because I know that was some big language for this legislation, and I was so excited to see it in there. But it was interesting how it kind of became like a hot button language thing, and oftentimes I think it's becomes that from people that don't even quite understand what it is. Do you have something to say about that, Senator Kemp?
Absolutely. The very tough conversation that I had to have with some advocacy groups was because they were misunderstanding teaching kids how to read with teaching kids how to understand what they're reading. And that's two different things. The context clues can be used, as you and Missy have very eloquently shared. That can be used to teach a kid to understand what they're reading, but actually teaching them to read a word is totally different. And I truly take this back to how teachers have been prepared. Like, they just don't know. And so that was a really tough conversation that I had to have. But that's really where the confusion comes into play. It's not that folks are against what we're trying to do. It's because they just don't understand.
Exactly. So Dr. Collins, I wanted to come back to you because I kind of explaining how some of these kids, and Senator Kemp talked about this too, can actually look sometimes like good readers. So kids that have a really good sight memory, they use all those guessing strategies really well. A lot of times they can look like good readers, and oftentimes they are passed on and passed through as they're an okay reader. As they get in 4th and 5th grade and in middle school, it kind of we're like, wait, something's going on. They were such a great reader. And parents are often like, no, my kid is a wonderful reader. And we kind of see this breakdown as the content gets harder, as the pictures are removed, as it becomes more nonfiction text and content-based text. So I'm wondering just the implications, Dr. Collins, of and what you're seeing, and maybe just what you're hearing, because I'm assuming you're often, especially in 12th grade advanced placement classes, you're probably not seeing as many of these kids, but I know your teacher friends are. How that kind of breaks down in kids that all of a sudden get to middle school and high school and really don't have decoding skills, can't read a text, whether it be a higher level text or just a basic text.
Absolutely. So I teach multicultural literature as well as AP literature. And just as Missy has stated, it really turns into more of a behavioral type method that you have to implement into your classroom versus teaching students how to read. I do think at the level that we are at in high school, and this is 9th through 12th, I honestly do think that a lot of teachers feel as if it is not their responsibility, honestly, to teach students how to read at that point. And that's just me being completely honest. I do think that we're constantly kind of like passing the buck in a sense. Mm-hmm. And this is just what I hear, honestly. I think that, as you stated earlier, we have this kind of method where we are going to end up leaving a group of students behind if we don't work together and collaborate. So that is just honestly what I see in the classroom and what I see in education. It's more so of we're really just giving the students, hey, read The Alchemist, tell me an analysis of this section of the book. What is Santiago's development, character development over time? We're going into all of this analysis where the student may not even truly understand what exactly they're reading. But I do think it comes to that, just a lack of collaboration in the school system. Just as Senator Kemp said, we do have individuals who are on two totally different ends of the spectrum of what they believe is right. And that just becomes kind of difficult for the teacher. And some teachers just kind of hide away and say, okay, well, here you go. This is all I have for you. So it just becomes like a passing the buck type of situation. So
absolutely. And I mean, it doesn't surprise any of us, because if Missy and I were in school for early childhood education and elementary education, we were at least getting some sort of, not the right, but some sort of reading instruction. But our middle school and high school teacher prep programs, they're really subject specific. So you have, a social studies or science teacher at the high school, and they're not going to have any tools in their tool belt for how to help a student that can't read the material. So, how it's so true. And I do think we've had some, and Missy, you would know about this. We've had some really good legislation around how teachers that are currently in place, obviously our teacher prep programs, we're starting to get better. And this legislation helps. But what is happening now in schools, Missy? And I know you've worked on this, that even in our middle school and high schools, are teachers getting some sort of science of reading instruction or training, or is it still really focused in those lower grades?
It's a very uneven experience in the state of Georgia. We have seen, I like to call them the golden child, but Marietta City Schools has really led the way. They started working on a lot of these measures that are now in our laws very early, before the laws happened. And they started at elementary. They began with just teacher training, which is so critical. I love their story because it started with teacher training. They got expert teachers, truly expert teachers. They brought in the support from outside. They partnered with organizations and people, some of the people that we know, like Hawks Campus, and Justin Browning was very influential in that space. And one of our state literacy coaches, Nick Philman. So there was a lot of emphasis in that district around that for early grades. Then they added some curriculum. They started adding the critical pieces that were needed. And they are now working on middle school. And I'll add to the middle school conversation, because I did teach middle school a little bit, but you're absolutely right, Dr. Collins. We did not have the tools. Even upper elementary school teachers, I think, fall into this bucket, because it is seen as an early childhood learning experience. And you're right about the passing the buck. Who's responsible for these kids when they can't read in the 4th and 5th grade? They continue to get passed along. So with parents in this space, I would say pay attention. It's not just a comprehension problem. I always tell parents, behind comprehension is fluency, and behind fluency is decoding, or what we might call phonemic awareness, which is a real technical term. But if your child is struggling with this end result of reading, it's likely because they have a weakness in foundational skills. And then, as Dr. Collins touched on, that turns into a knowledge gap over time. This happened to my son, and this is what got me so on fire, is he was in the 4th grade and couldn't read proficiently. So he was constantly reading books that were on the 1st grade level, but his peers were 4th and 5th grade. So guess what was happening? They were getting exposed to a world of vocabulary and knowledge in order that they needed to be able to read The Alchemist, but they didn't have. He wasn't going to get there. And he was often being pulled for the wrong reading instruction during times when they would do read alouds, which were knowledge building moments. They were doing historical fiction. So as everyone else was doing a deep dive on the Civil War, he was working on something that wasn't helping him. And so it was a double whammy. So to answer your question, the problem is great, and it gets greater as they get older, because we develop more comorbidities and the knowledge gaps get bigger. So it is of great concern that is not something that is a focus. It's not a focus right now because we don't have a law behind it, and the law mandates K-3. Some districts, because they are becoming more knowledgeable or realizing the problems, are not going away just because we're tackling K-3. And so, but we end up sending kids to Dr. Collins who struggle with the wonderful long text. There was a recent piece that came out, and I'm sure someone could find the article, but it was all about how college professors are having students who can't read long text. Long text, I mean, a full book, because that is a product of balanced literacy, because they've been reading mentor passages in small text to practice a set of reading strategies that are meant to mitigate the fact they can't read. And so it's just a perpetual problem. So it was happening when I taught. It was happening to my own child, and it is currently still happening. I know for sure in my county, Gwinnett County, because I attend way too many IEP meetings, and I see it constantly. So, and I see frustrated teachers who want to help. This goes back to, we've said this a lot. They want to help. I see those I see me sitting in those chairs. Mm-hmm. They want to do the right thing. They don't have the tools, or they don't have the support from a knowledgeable team around them that can give them what they need to help these kids.
Yeah. So I would love to talk about, and Senator Kemp, I just want to dive into the House Bill 307 and your Senate Bill 93. What can parents be looking for? What changes should we notice as parents, coming home with our child right away? Like, when, the more political kind of when things are going to roll out. And I do think our budget has been passed. Is that correct? So we have some really good things that have been budgeted for. And so what could we be looking for? What is kind of coming? What are parents going to notice a shift? And how do they advocate at their schools if they are seeing some of this 3Qing stuff we're talking about?
Yeah. So I would love for, at some point, I'm going to ask Missy to say some of these, like balanced literacy and things like that. Our schools should not be using those curricula anymore. I spoke with one school district who said, to your point about, teachers, paying so much money for degrees and learning that some of what they taught was not, helpful. There are a lot of districts that paid a lot of money for curriculum that they now have to get rid of. So that's probably also some of the pushback that we get, because there is a cost to some of this. So there are some, curricula out there that we should no longer be using in Georgia, because it's not specifically aligned to the science of reading. And that is a requirement here in the state. In addition to that, the budget does put more money into literacy, which is great. So ensuring that we have effective coaching, because that is so important, because as Missy shared, teachers want to get it right, but a lot of times they just don't have the support to really get it right. And so there's money being put behind it in the budget. There's money being put to hopefully screen for more students that are dyslexic. I'm so glad that you all have the resources and wherewithal to be able to have your child identified as being dyslexic, but there are a lot of parents that do not have that capability. So now there's going to be screeners across the state to identify students to help them get the support that they need earlier on. So that is all great news. And I'll let Missy say some of the things like reading recovery, I know, and balanced literacy. Those are some of them that we should not be doing anymore.
Yeah. So Missy, you're a great parent advocate. So what should parents really, like those buzzwords, like Senator Kemp was talking about, what should they be listening for, trying to, how do they talk to their kid's teacher about this and kind of hear bells go up if something isn't exactly like, following this new set of legislation?
What a great question. And Senator Kemp is right. We're no more balanced literacy. Curriculums have to be aligned with evidence-based instruction and what we know about science. But beyond that, that's a great question. What should a parent listen for? Goodness. Where do I start? If you are given an alphabet letter for your child's reading level, that's a red flag. No more. That is a big red flag that your district is using something called Fontes and Pinnell. That's the benchmark assessment system and is aligned with balanced literacy. Those letters mean nothing. What you want to hear instead is, what are the skills that your kid has? Does your child have strong phonemic awareness skills? Their fluency? Are they reading fluently? What is their comprehension like? And so you want to be listening for that. That's what we're screening for in the screener. You also want to you want to hear what the school is doing. So if let's say you're a parent, your child is struggling and you got a screener at the school, which should happen within the first 30 days of school. That's something we pushed for in this legislation because it was undefined in the prior dyslexia bill. And so the first 30 days, I would even fight for sooner, but this is the best I could get this time. We can fight later. You can add that to your list for next year, Senator Kemp. But because the earlier we know, the earlier we can start interventions. So, and I'll tell you this is what I did. When I got really mama advocate over here in second grade, I marched myself into second grade. Mrs. Malloy, who is the saint of all saints, she's retired and enjoying a great life because she was a good human and did the right thing. But you know what? I said, I want you to test him the first week of school. I don't want to wait until the whole group does it. You can be that parent. I don't know if they'll do it for you, but you should push. You can tell them you're worried, you're concerned, get it as early as possible, but they have to do it within the first 30 days. They also have to notify you as a parent within 15 days of the results of that screener. This year, it kind of got implemented, but it's all over the place. So this new law starting next year will really give parents a better understanding of when they should know. And then start asking questions because that should lead to an intervention that is targeted to your child's weaknesses. So if your child has poor phonemic awareness, that means they can't decode the words well because they don't know the sounds that every letter combination in the English language makes, then there should be an intervention addressing that. They shouldn't be working on comprehension when they have a phonemic awareness, weakness. And your child doesn't have to have a reading disability. The sad truth in all of this, and this is why we advocate even as dyslexia organizations for what happens in the Gen Ed Tier 1 classroom, is because a lot of our kids have what we call dyslexia. They have it because of what we're using. They look like kids with disabilities when really they just have had poor instruction with poor curriculum. And so those are the things that you should see. Those are the things you should ask about. And hopefully it'll really change what's happening in our classrooms. There's still more work to do though.
Guys, I wanted to jump in here because first of all, I am a parent and now I'm a grandparent working with my own grandson who's 5, who I homeschool my kids and they were reading at 5. And he is still learning and still, we're still in this fight together. But one of the things that I wanted to just talk about, I put in the side, but I want to say these things out loud because maybe we don't have access to the chat afterwards. Here's talk. It is clear evidence, and you guys can speak to this, that in more marginalized communities, our children are hearing as many as 1,000 fewer words than other students. And so we are not even prepared in early learning to even prepare ourselves or our children to learn how to read. I used to have a saying when I sent my kids to school, listen, I'm not sending you an empty book. I filled in some pages. I need you to help be a partner in this. And so we have to fill in some of these pages for our babies before they even get to school. Yes, the teachers have to learn a new way. They do need to be doing their science of reading. We are grateful for the legislation, but we do have to accept some responsibility as parents, as communities, as early learning centers. And what can we do? We can play with sounds, right? We can do rhyming games, clap syllables. YouTube is wonderful. Go back and pull up Electric Company and, all the Sesame Street.
You'll have us singing over here.
All those things that we learned on, research them. You had this little thing called a computer, right? And break the words into sounds like, cat equals k, at. The phonemic awareness that Missy talked about. Teach letters and sounds together. Like Morgan Freeman, we love him. We see him now. Like he would say sh, ip, ship. And you would see the words floating out of his mouth. Using codable books, as Missy talked about, right? Starting with books where kids can sound out the words, read short, simple stories together. It doesn't have to be it can be a book with five words in the whole book and more pictures, but we have to begin to foster the love of language and reading at home. Talk aloud, talk to them more, read out loud daily, speak in full sentences, not text language, explain new words, read books with rich vocabulary. And if we are struggling with that, then there are so many agencies now that are helping to get GEDs, but also to helping with literacy, because we know, listening to you all, that we really have failed an entire generation, right? And so now their kids are going to school and they're not as prepared to learn because maybe some of the parents were not as prepared to learn either. Practice with repeating books. It's okay. I had heavy hitters. Anybody here? You're reading the same thing every night. Your kid's demanding it. You know the book by heart, right? It's lulling you to sleep instead of them. Reread your favorite books to help them become faster, smoother readers, even if they don't want to. Ask story questions like, after reading, what happened here, Missy? How did the story end, Emani? Encourage your child to retell it in their own words, and they'll begin to pick up the language, right? And then make reading fun and visible. I used to read with my kids. I'm an avid reader, but I'm not going to lie. When it was, I would call like Buford's Unplugged, that meant no electronics in the house. Now, I may or may not have had my iPad inside of a magazine like, that I was reading, but I already know how to read, but I made it fun. I made cookies. I did a circle. I gave them treats if they did what they wanted to, because out of my 3 boys, I had a son that didn't like to read. And he said it out of his mouth. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to die. But he loved sports. So guess what I found? Books on sports. And he is now writing a book because he did learn to love to read. And lastly, get hands-on. Trace letters in sand. You can get some whipped cream. I used to do this when I worked in schools. Get whipped cream and $1, the little plastic, what do you call it? Tablecloth. Spray whipped cream all over it. It's so fun. You can get everything at Dollar Tree and then have them trace the letters with their fingers so they can feel it and they can get the dexterity. Sing the ABC songs over and over again. All the basic things still work, and use movement to connect to sounds and action. So I, as a parent, a grandparent, and as a member and leading some work with the National Parents Union, I had to jump in here and say, for parents, we have to make reading fun again. We have to be found and seen reading for our students. But I would like to tap into, I'm going to ask Dr. Collins, what are some things, even though you teach high school, what are maybe 2 things you would love for parents to do, even with their high school students or their middle school students, as it pertains to literacy and reading? Something simple they could do at home.
So the first thing is something that you have just stated. Talking to your students is so important. So my babies are graduating on May 22nd. I'm so proud of them. It's just wonderful to see them just accomplish so much. But talking to them at home is so important. We have so many students who I am honestly worried about. I'm worried about them advocating for themselves in their lives. Honestly, after May 22nd, they will no longer be in the confines of our school building. And I'm just nervous to see how they'll do, honestly, in their adulthood, being able to advocate for themselves, speak highly of themselves, to read effectively, to just be, regular citizens. And something like reading is so pivotal for them. I would say that, and also working with the community. That is something that when I was getting ready for the panel, I wrote down everywhere for every answer, is how important the community is. We always say it takes a village, and it truly does. And I think as a teacher, that's something that I have kind of supported a little bit more this year. I can say I'm in my 5th year of teaching, and I've really kind of leaned on the community a little more. I've really gotten engaged with different advocacy groups and programs, calling more parents, seeing how I can help. I had a student who I got into teaching, but I was in HR at one point for the Department of Transportation. And I have a student who goes to Kennesaw State University, and I was able to help him get an internship with the Department of Transportation. His mother reached out to me. It was a very random, but it was something that I was able to do. I don't know anything about civil engineering, but I was able to help. So just talking to the individuals in the community, you never know who can help your student. You never know who can help your child. So I think those two are really, really important. Showing that you care, because I have a lot of students who feel as if they don't have many people who care. And they just need to know that we do. We all do. We're all here. There are tons of people on this line right now, the amazing panelists that we have, we all do care. So that just needs to be reiterated for them.
Elizabeth, while you're going, you continue to teach teachers. Now, with both of these bills being passed, what are two things that you might, do differently? I have a feeling you've already been teaching the science of reading. But what is something that you feel renewed, two things that you can take with you as you teach this new cohort of teachers?
Teaching teachers is one of the most rewarding things. I always wanted to teach kids. So it's been a total shift teaching teachers the last couple of years. But as we've said tonight, they want to do right by their kids and they want to know this information. So I'm always very clear. And, Senator Kemp touched on this. A lot of teachers have guilt. And we say, and as well as I do, I taught for 10 years before I knew how to actually teach a child how to read. So one of my favorite things to tell teachers is, again, the quote of, when we know better, we do better. Don't beat yourself up, but know that you are getting this training and you are going to change lives, change trajectories of kids' lives with this training. You are, we always say literacy and justice for all. It is being literate and being able to read is a civil right. It is everyone's right. And so we've, like you said, we've kind of failed a generation. And I think a lot of teachers, especially early grades teachers, feel, guilty about that. But I love telling teachers, you're doing the right thing. You are going to change lives with this information. And honestly, all the teachers I train for the most part are so grateful to receive this instruction. They're so grateful to have something in their hands and know what to go do in the classroom the next day. Even it's as simple as the electric company stuff and being able to hear every sound in a word, and teachers even knowing what is a phoneme, what is a morpheme, what is a digraph. These were things that I left. Yeah. I left with a master's in early literacy, not knowing those things. So when we're teaching, empowering teachers, they're just so happy to take it all in. And so I just know that with the widening of this, with it being legislated, with us having this in the books, even though there are so many of us that have been doing it for years, there are many schools who've been doing it for years, but we needed this statewide. And that's what was so important about this legislation. And, what I would just tell any teachers that are kind of embarking on this, that are just going to be receiving this, next year, that it's empowering.
I had the honor of going back to my alma mater yesterday, Clark Atlanta University, and they, in the graduating cohort of teachers, judged their final project. I cannot tell you how exhilarating it was. Listen, Missy, we got to get together. I need to find some money to go back to school because now I want to teach on the collegiate level. Not saying I'm leaving NPU, not yet, but I'm just saying I was bitten by the bug of the promise, right? I'm getting so, I don't know why I'm getting these hormones. I'm getting so emotional. The promise of our future, listening to them, understand empathy, restorative justice practices, talk about how important community is in education and teaching and all the things. And now knowing that, you all have been instrumental in bringing these laws to the forefront, making sure that these young people are equipped to do the best job possible. I feel where I could be feeling hopeless about some of the things that are going on, I felt so renewed coming from there yesterday, knowing we're having this conversation. And now I told Senator Kemp, I texted him, I was like, really, you're going to withhold that from me and just boom, the news? But I am so excited I'm literally elevating about the promise of our future for our children. I feel like so many rights are going so many wrongs are going to be righted. And I'm excited. So Senator Kemp, as a parent, a former educator, once an educator, always an educator, and now a legislator, what is one thing that you would say parents could do, or what you would like to see happen with parents as you work with National Parents Union to educate parents across Georgia? Something that, as a parent, what does this mean to you? You have a 3-year-old, or just Brooklyn just turned 4. So as a parent, what does this mean to you, parenting a child that is just entering her literacy journey?
Yeah, I had posted updating friends and family about, my bill often. And one day it clicked to me that my daughter is going to get an experience that is going to change the trajectory of her life because it could have went the wrong way. And so I am so thankful to be a parent and have this honor of being able to pass legislation that's going to impact not just Brooklyn, but all kids. Because like you said, once you're an educator, you're always an educator. You want to help every kid that you can across the state. And that's really, my goal in this is always thinking about the babies. What am I doing at the Capitol that's going to impact our children? And also understanding I'm a former teacher and former principal, like what am I doing that's going to help our teachers? And, as I learned about all of this, and, what really struck me so much is to talk to teachers, and especially teachers when they like kind of have that light bulb come on, like, oh my God, I've been teaching this way. And, thinking about the kids that, they have in their, in their hearts feel like they let down, but just reminding them that, look, this is your opportunity to make sure we're getting it right. Sorry, my daughter sees me. She just got
that is, we love children. Hey, Brooklyn.
Promise. But, this is like such impactful work. And if, there's one thing I can say to parents is your legislators need to hear from you. I know it can be seen as kind of like an intimidating thing, but please know you are the expert. We are not experts in everything. Education is my sweet spot. I'm on the agriculture committee. I know nothing about growing nothing, but I am learning, I'm excited. And, it's so important for us to hear from you because honestly, any bills that are introduced comes from our conversations with parents and our constituents. And, I've been taking notes through this conversation because getting some ideas already, but that is how good law is passed. It's by having conversations like this and talking to your legislators. So we need to hear from you more often.
So Missy, before I wrap up, I personally just physically met you, but I feel like we've been orbiting in each other's space for so long. It has been such a joy, the energy, the knowledge. We have a promise. We have a coffee date set for Gwinnett County soon as we can get to it. But say you were just a regular parent that didn't know any of this, right? What is something that you, with all of your knowledge, would want parents to know, to ask? Like, what is next? What do we look for next as parents in the fall? And Senator Kemp, I forgot to ask you to speak on, what is next for the implementation of this bill. But Missy, I'll go to you. I'm a parent just taking a kid to school in the fall. I've got elementary school kids that have quite possibly been being taught the wrong way. What do I say to my school? How do I hold the school accountable as a parent?
Great question. Gosh, I'm going to go back to Missy before she did know things, because remember, I was a teacher and I didn't know the things, right? So that was a reality. I didn't know. But I would say the first thing you should do is if there's any red flags that your child is not reading proficiently, start asking hard questions and don't be afraid to advocate for your child. You can start with, hey, it looks like my child's comprehension is weak. You guys send out this screener and it says there's a weakness here. What does that mean? How does that impact them in the classroom? Or it looks like my child scored below the benchmark for phonemic awareness. Parents know that means your child is struggling to actually read the words because they can't put the sound to the letter. That's the phoneme to the grapheme. I won't be too teachery here, but they can't do that with automaticity or automatically. So that's going to lead to a struggle. So ask, what does that look like for my child in the classroom? And then the next thing you should be asking is, help me decipher this screener report. It doesn't make sense to me. Don't be afraid to not know. You're not supposed to know all these things. You didn't go to school to get this degree. You do something else. And so you need the help of the experts who are hopefully becoming more of an experts now because of the great legislation that Kemp has backed. But you ask those hard questions and then ask them, what are we going to do about it? I wish I had pushed harder for my kid. That is a regret of mine because I listened to a lot of advice that's just not good. There's nothing good that comes from waiting except for failing, and that's not good. So what we know, all evidence tells us that every kid needs early intervention. This is true for anything. And I challenge anyone to give me one thing that gets better by waiting. There's probably a few things that we probably shouldn't discuss, but most of the time when you wait, things get worse. If there's a sickness, it gets worse. So this is just not a good thing. So don't
Nothing
let
in
anyone
education
tell you,
for sure.
Nothing. Thank you for adding that clarifier. That is a great clarifier.
Time is money. Time is wisdom. Time is knowledge. Time is something we don't have when it comes to our babies and learning, period.
Right. Yes.
Whether it is numeracy, literacy, whatever, any type of skill, anything that they need other than how to get on a cell phone. Technology is moving while we're asleep. Nothing is good. Nothing good happens in education when we wait as it pertains to our students learning. Senator Kemp, I'm going to wrap up. I'll give you like maybe a minute or so to say, when does the implementation of this start? Does it start in 2026? Does it start in 2027? Does it start immediately? When does it start?
Yeah, so it starts July 1. We are, once a bill is signed, unless it says otherwise, it starts July 1st. And so these bills that we're talking about begin July 1st. And so many of the stuff that we've talked about has already been being implemented. The Georgia Early Literacy Act was passed in 2023. So many of these things are being implemented as we speak. Definitely be looking out for that. And one thing that really stood out to me, what Elizabeth shared, because we've all seen it with kids when they're reading, they kind of just look around. Now I know, if, my child isn't tackling that word, saying okay, I'm going to figure out by what I've been taught to figure this word out, that is a flag. And that means that you need to be talking to your teacher. So thank you so much for sharing it. That was a very visual thing that I think parents needed to see.
And so, first of all, thank you so much to all of our panelists. We need to do a part 2 in the community because I want us to have breakouts and all things, really getting our community, as Dr. Collins said, involved and engaged, and our parents to understanding how we all can better support our students. But, as we build momentum with the National Parents Union, doing this work across Georgia, we partner with the families to advocate for stronger classroom support and policies at our district level. Like I said, Metro Atlanta, all of Georgia. You need to ask questions, go to the board meetings, see what's happening. I was down at the Capitol this year as a registered lobbyist. I saw very few people, not a lot of traffic. Senator Kemp, I talked to many of the senators and the House of Representatives on both sides of the aisle saying, we want to see and hear from our people. Everyone can't afford to get to the Capitol, but you can email, right? You can contact us. We will help you with a letter writing campaign. If you want to do a good old fashioned letter, contact me at National Parents Union, right? Go to our website. We have all types of templates that you can use. We have a letter writing tool to Congress about what is happening currently. But we have to use evidence-based literacy practices grounded in the science of reading. I hope that you will join me and National Parents Union as we continue to hold school systems and our elected leaders accountable to ensure that all of this powerful policy that we are collectively fighting for is implemented with fidelity, because now we have to look at what the Georgia Department of Education is doing. So Trump is trying to dismantle the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education. But what are we going to do right here in Georgia to further this fight, right? To advocate for our children and our students? What is happening with the Georgia Department of Education, and how are we getting involved, staying up on what is happening? Ask how reading supports are being delivered and to your students, and demand clear, measurable results. Demand early screening, as Missy alluded to earlier. Structured literacy and data-driven instruction are your right. It is the civil right of every student in public schools, traditional and public charters, to have a high quality public education. That's your civil right, right? And don't let anybody tell you different. You have the right to ask questions. Make sure they're enforcing your child's IEP and their 504 rights, and connect with advocacy networks like us, like Decoding Dyslexia, accessing your legislators who are telling you, call me, right? Senator Kemp, and there's a whole gaggle of legislators that are saying, email us, write us a letter, call us, call me. You'll see I got a big mouth. I can deliver the message for you and help you to get connected. And so as we continue to watch some of the things in our world be set on fire, we are renewed with purpose and a fire lit behind each and every one of us about what we can do as Americans ourselves, what we can do as Georgians, right? We will not stand down. We will not sit down. We will continue to advocate for every child in the Georgia education system to have access to high quality public education options, be they traditional public education or public charter schools. We are fighting for that right for every child to have that, because that is what we are owed. I want to thank you all again for tuning in. You could be anywhere on a Wednesday night, and you chose to be here with us, with National Parents Union. Again, we are the independent, united voice of modern American families. Families look a lot different than when I grew up, maybe than from when you grew up. But we are championing, fighting with, and helping to amplify the voice of modern American families. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. The recording will be available right after we close. And so thank you. I'm giving you about how many minutes? 7 minutes of your time back on this Wednesday. Thank you so much. Have a great week.